My name is Dorothy. I am 72 years old, and for 31 years I never missed a single Christmas with my family. Not one. Not when my husband was in the hospital. Not when I broke my hip. Not even the year I had the flu so bad I could barely stand up straight. I showed up every single time with pies in my hands and love in my heart. But last Christmas, my daughter-in-law raised her hand and struck me across the face in front of my whole family, over a gravy boat. And nobody, not one single person in that room, said a word in my defense. That was the last time I ever helped that family again. And what happened after, when I finally stopped giving, is a story I don't think any of them will ever forget. If you've ever been taken for granted by the people you love most, if you've ever given everything you had only to be treated like nothing, then I think you're going to want to hear this one all the way through. So before I go any further, if stories like mine mean something to you, go ahead and hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. It helps more than you know, and trust me, this story is worth staying for. Now let me back up and tell you how we got here. I raised my son Andrew on my own for the better part of his childhood. His father, my husband Walter, worked long hauls as a truck driver, and it was often just me and Andrew in that little house on Maple Hollow Road. I worked 2 jobs some years just to keep food on the table and new shoes on his feet. I never complained. That's just what a mother does. When Andrew grew up, married, and had children of his own, I promised myself I would be the kind of grandmother who was always there. And I was. I babysat little Emma and Lucas every single week without asking for a dime. I paid for their school clothes every August. I covered their dance recital costumes, their baseball cleats, their birthday parties. When Andrew and his wife Brittany fell behind on their mortgage 2 years ago, I quietly wired them $11,000 from my late husband's life insurance money, the same money I was supposed to be living on for the rest of my days. I never told a soul. I didn't want anyone to think less of Andrew, and I certainly didn't want gratitude. I just wanted my family to be okay. I tell you all of this not to brag, but so you understand exactly what kind of relationship I thought we had. I thought I mattered to them. I thought 31 years of showing up meant something. Last Christmas Eve, I arrived at Andrew and Brittany's house at 4 in the afternoon. Just like always, with 2 pies, a casserole, and a bag of gifts I had spent months saving up for. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, the kids were running around in their pajamas, and for a moment, everything felt exactly the way Christmas should feel. Dinner was going fine until it wasn't. Brittany had made a big deal about hosting that year, about how everything had to be perfect because her side of the family was coming too. I understood that. I wanted to help. So when I noticed the gravy was starting to separate on the stove, I stepped in, the way I've done 100 times before, and I picked up the gravy boat to bring it to the table myself. Brittany came around the corner just as I lifted it, and in her rush she bumped into me. The gravy spilled, some of it landing on the tablecloth her mother had apparently given her as a wedding gift. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart, let me clean that right up." But before I could even reach for a napkin, she turned around and slapped me across the face, hard enough that my glasses flew off and skidded across the hardwood floor. Hard enough that the room went silent except for the sound of little Emma starting to cry. I stood there in shock, my cheek burning, my ears ringing, 12 people staring at me, and not one of them moved. Not my son. Not my sister-in-law Diane. Not Brittany's own parents, who were sitting right there at the table. Andrew finally spoke, but not to defend me. He said, "Mom, maybe you should go sit down. You know how stressed she gets during the holidays. I want you to sit with that for a second." My own son, watching his mother get struck in the face by his wife, chose in that moment to protect her feelings instead of my dignity. I didn't cry in front of them. I have too much pride for that. I picked my glasses up off the floor. I wiped the gravy off the tablecloth with my own 2 hands, and I said, "I think I'll head home now, it's getting late." Nobody stopped me. Nobody apologized. I drove home alone on Christmas Eve with tears finally streaming down my face once I was far enough away that no one could see. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea going cold in front of me, replaying 31 years in my head. Every birthday I never missed. Every check I quietly wrote. Every night I stayed up with a sick grandchild so Andrew and Brittany could get some rest. And I realized something that broke my heart and steadied it at the very same time. I had spent my whole life being useful to that family, but I had never once been valued by them. And those are 2 very different things. So I made a decision that night, sitting alone in my kitchen at 72 years old. I decided I was done. Not done being their mother. Not done loving my grandchildren. But done being their safety net. Done being the woman who quietly fixes everything and asks for nothing in return, only to be treated like she doesn't matter. The next morning, Christmas Day, Andrew called me. He didn't apologize. He asked if I was still coming over for the gift exchange with the kids. I told him no. I told him I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't entirely a lie. Over the next few weeks, I made some very quiet decisions. I called my bank and stopped the automatic monthly transfer I had been sending Andrew for 18 months to help with the kids' after-school program, something he didn't even know I knew he was behind on. I called Emma's dance studio and let the prepaid tuition I had set up simply run out at the end of the term. I canceled the standing babysitting arrangement I had every Tuesday and Thursday, the one that let Brittany work her extra shifts at the hospital without paying for daycare. I didn't announce any of it. I didn't send an angry text or make a speech. I simply stopped. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. Silence, actually, which told me everything I needed to know about how little they thought about me when I wasn't actively solving a problem for them. Then, in late January, the cracks started to show. Brittany called me, and for the first time in years, her voice wasn't sharp or dismissive. It was tight with panic. She said the dance studio had called about a missed payment, and she didn't understand what happened, since she thought it was already handled. I simply said, "Oh, I stopped covering that. I didn't realize it was something you were counting on me for." There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. A week after that, Andrew called about the after-school program. Same story. He asked almost accusingly why I hadn't said anything before I just stopped. I told him the truth. I said I didn't think I owed anyone an explanation for deciding not to keep paying for things quietly, the same way nobody owed me an explanation for what happened at Christmas. He didn't have a response to that. Then came the bigger problem. The one that finally cracked everything wide open. See, what neither Andrew nor Brittany knew was that $11,000 I had wired them 2 years earlier for their mortgage hadn't been a one-time thing in my mind. Not exactly. I had quietly continued covering a portion of their monthly payment ever since, routing it through an account Andrew thought was just his automatic bill pay working correctly. He never once questioned why the math worked out so easily every month. He simply assumed they were managing fine on their own. They were not managing fine on their own. They had been leaning on me without even realizing how much weight I was carrying for them. In February, I stopped that transfer too. 3 weeks later, Andrew showed up at my door unannounced, looking like he hadn't slept. He told me the bank had sent a late notice on the mortgage. He asked almost desperately if I could help just this once to get them caught up. And here is the moment, the one I've thought about every single day since, where I finally said everything I had been holding inside for 31 years. I told him calmly that I had been quietly propping up their household finances for 2 years without either of them ever thanking me, checking on me, or even wondering how a 72-year-old widow living on a fixed income could possibly afford to. I told him that on the one night I was struck in the face in his home, he chose his wife's comfort over my safety, and that from that moment forward, I understood exactly where I stood in that family. I told him I loved him. I told him I loved his children more than anything in this world. But I told him that love does not mean allowing yourself to be used, and then discarded the moment you're inconvenient. He cried on my porch that day. He apologized finally for Christmas. He said he had been afraid of Brittany's temper for years and had learned to just smooth things over instead of standing up for what was right, even when it meant sacrificing me to keep the peace at home. I believed that he meant it. But I also told him that an apology 3 months late, only after the money stopped, wasn't the same as an apology given out of love. I did not give them the money for the mortgage. They ended up having to refinance, take on a bit more debt, and Brittany picked up extra shifts at the hospital to cover the gap I had been quietly filling for years. It was hard for them. I won't pretend it wasn't. But it was also finally honest. For the first time in years, they were living within the reality of what they actually earned, not what I had been secretly subsidizing. Here's the part that shocked everyone, including me, if I'm being honest. About 4 months after that porch conversation, Brittany reached out to me directly. Not through Andrew. Just her and me, over coffee at a little diner near my house. She told me she had grown up in a home where her own mother was walked all over, And somewhere along the way she had promised herself she would never be that woman, the one who gets treated like a doormat. She said that somehow, without realizing it, she had turned that fear into cruelty toward the one person in her life who had only ever tried to help her. She apologized for Christmas. Really apologized with tears, not excuses. She told me she understood now, once the money stopped and she had to face the actual cost of running a household, exactly how much I had been caring for her family without ever asking for recognition. I won't tell you that everything healed perfectly, because that wouldn't be true, and I promised myself a long time ago I'd never lie to make a story sound tidier than real life actually is. There are still moments of tension. There are still things that were said at that Christmas table that I don't think I'll ever fully forget. But I do still see my grandchildren every week. Andrew calls me now, actually calls just to talk, not just when he needs something. And Brittany, for the first time in the 8 years she's been my daughter-in-law, sent me a birthday card last month that she wrote herself by hand, instead of the store-bought one with someone else's signature scrawled beneath a printed verse. I am not helping that family financially anymore, not the way I used to. And I've come to understand that this was never really about punishing them. It was about finally understanding my own worth after 31 years of quietly forgetting it myself. If you take one thing away from my story, let it be this. You can love your family with your whole heart, and still refuse to be treated like you don't matter. Those two things are not in conflict. In fact, I think real love sometimes requires exactly that kind of boundary, because the moment people learn they can hurt you without consequence, they will keep doing it, not always out of malice but simply because you let them. I gave that family 31 years of Christmases, holidays, babysitting, and quiet sacrifice. It took losing all of it all at once for them to finally see what I had been giving them the entire time. I'm Dorothy, I'm 72 years old, and I finally learned it is never too late to remember that you deserve to be treated with respect, even by the people who share your last name. If this story touched you in any way, please make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because there are more stories just like mine still to come. Real stories from real women who finally found their voice later in life. And if you've ever had a moment where you had to choose your own dignity over someone else's comfort, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.